I understand, but we need to consider all the options before making a decision.
I've been reading this fascinating book about historical events.
Oh, really? Anything interesting you'd like to share?
So I was thinking we could expand the marketing campaign to include social media influencers.
That's an interesting idea. How would that work?
Yeah, that looks about right. Okay, let's keep going then.
The morning light dripped through the half-finished roof like molten gold, slicing across the dust that danced in the air. The new farm stood like a wounded beast slowly healing, its wooden bones exposed, its breath still shallow. Men moved along the skeleton of the front gate, hammering and muttering, their voices sharp against the quiet valley. Diep stood a few steps back, boots sinking into the damp soil, watching the boards slam into place like ribs closing around a fragile heart. Her hands were clenched, though she didn't realize it, nails biting crescent moons into her palms as if she were holding the whole structure together by will alone. Her phone screamed in her pocket, an ugly sound in the soft air. She snatched it up, voice already taut. A man's voice spilled through, all teeth and impatience, asking about the money. It was not a question. It was a warning wrapped in words. Diep's throat went dry. She promised she would pay by afternoon, that she just needed time. The man chuckled without warmth and hung up. The silence that followed buzzed like a hornet in her ear. She stood very still, staring at the raw wood of the gate, imagining it splintering, collapsing, burying her hopes in dust before they even took shape. One of the workers called to her, asking if there were enough boards. She nodded, forcing her voice steady. They had enough, for now. But everything felt like that lately. Barely enough, maybe enough, if nothing else went wrong. The thought followed her like a shadow as she moved through the half-formed yard, checking the grapefruit trees, the orange saplings, the tangled grass she would have to tame. The land breathed under her feet, restless and waiting, like a giant she was trying to coax into slumber. By midday, the sun was a white blade overhead, and sweat clung to her skin like fear. A small black car whispered down the dirt road, and Lin stepped out, sharp suit, catching the light like armor. He carried a folder thick with papers that looked heavier than bricks. He smiled, polite and thin, and led her to the makeshift table beneath the old mango tree. The smell of resin and dust curled around them as he laid the papers out. His voice was smooth, practiced, explaining land rights and signatures and stamps. The words barely touched her. They slid off like water off oiled stone. The paper trembled under her fingers. Her name was a strange, fragile thing to scrawl, crooked and unsteady. The letters like newborn foals trying to stand. Lin guided her hand gently, his tone soft but edged with urgency, as if the land might vanish if they hesitated. When it was done, he slid the papers back into his case like a magician hiding a trick. He told her the rains had slowed everything, that the workers were few, that the farm would need patience like a wound needs bandages. She nodded, though her chest felt hollow. He spoke of selling fruits, of James's company buying whatever she could harvest. The words sparked faint warmth in the cold cavern of her thoughts. She thanked him, voice thin, and he left in a blur of polished shoes and dust. The silence that returned was too big for the fragile frame of the half-built farm. Diep stood among the trees, the signed paper still ghosting her fingertips, and felt like she had just swallowed something vast and sharp. The world sagged into afternoon. The sun leaned low, painting everything in long shadows, and the workers drifted away like exhausted birds. The farm exhaled a weary sigh, boards creaking as they cooled. Diep stripped off her gloves, hands trembling, and turned toward the forest at the edge of the property. The bamboo thicket whispered in the breeze, green spears rattling like quiet applause. She grabbed a basket and stepped into its shadow. The air instantly cooler, damp and alive, the forest swallowed her. The smell of earth rose like a living thing, wrapping around her legs. She knelt in the loam, fingers digging, searching for the tender new shoots hiding under the soil. Each one came free with a faint pop, pale and slick, like bones pulled from flesh. She laid them gently in her basket, the sound of their soft impact strangely loud in the hush. For a moment, crouched among the bamboo, she could almost believe the world was simple, that survival was just this, finding what the earth gave and taking it before it vanished. Her phone buzzed again, a serpent in the quiet. She answered quickly. Hung's voice rumbled through, warm and solid, asking what she needed at the workshop. She told him the wooden frame in the kitchen had cracked, that it needed fixing before it took the whole wall down. He said he'd come by soon. She thanked him, maybe too quickly, and hung up, staring at the green gloom until her eyes blurred. By the time she stepped out of the trees, the light had gone soft and gold. The farm lay spread beneath the sinking sun, its unfinished skin glowing as if lit from within. The sight wrenched something deep in her chest, a strange blend of pride and terror, like watching a child balance on a cliff edge. She carried the basket of shoots back to the house, each step slow, as if she feared the ground might dissolve under her feet. The kitchen greeted her with silence. The counters smelled of sawdust and soap, the air heavy with stillness. She set the basket down and began washing the shoots, peeling their thin skins with careful fingers. The sound of running water was steady, almost soothing, like a distant heartbeat. Her mind hummed with the weight of everything still undone. The roof to finish, the soil to clear, the money she didn't have yet. The list coiled around her like a constrictor, squeezing until her breath came shallow. A faint laugh echoed from the yard. Nee's voice, high and bright, carried on the breeze. Diep paused, hands dripping, and listened. Somewhere down the road, James would be picking her up from school, bringing her back with her drawings and her small, defiant grin. The thought loosened something inside Diep. She exhaled, long and shaky, then wiped her hands and set the shoots to boil. Their earthy scent blooming like hope, rising stubbornly through cracks in stone. Outside, the last light melted over the fields, and the unfinished gate cast long, crooked shadows like broken teeth. The farm stood waiting, not yet whole, but breathing, alive. Diep stood at the stove, stirring the pot, watching the bamboo shoots swirl in the boiling water like pale ghosts dancing. Somewhere in the dark, the man who wanted his money would be watching the clock. But for this moment, there was only the soft clatter of pots, the smell of earth and fire, and the fragile, furious heartbeat of something new being born. The schoolyard hummed with the chaos of release, 100 small voices crashing like waves against the rusting gate. James stood just beyond the fence, hands in his pockets, the sharp wind tugging at his coat. He looked out of place among the clutter of bright backpacks and scuffed shoes, like a shadow painted into a child's drawing. Then he saw her, nigh, darting through the crowd, her pigtails flying like banners, clutching 2 small slips of paper in her fist. Her grin split the dusk like lightning. She slammed into him with the force of a tiny hurricane, and for a heartbeat, he couldn't breathe. She held up the papers like trophies. 2 good behavior stars, she said, breathless, proud. The words wrapped around his ribs and squeezed. He laughed, a low, stunned sound, and swung her up in his arms. The world went briefly lighter, less sharp, as if her smile had sanded its edges down. He pressed his forehead to hers and promised they would celebrate. The drive back wound through the skeletal trees, their black branches clattering against the pale sky like bones. Nee sang nonsense songs in the back seat, her voice small and fierce, cutting through the gray. James glanced at her in the mirror, and for a flickering moment saw something terrifyingly fragile. How small she was, how easily the world could decide to swallow her whole. He tightened his grip on the wheel until the leather creaked. Not this time. Not her. The house rose from the fading fields like a wounded creature trying to stand. Its half-finished gate threw long, jagged shadows, but warm light pulsed from the windows like a heartbeat. James pulled into the yard and knee bounded out, shoes scattering gravel. The front door opened before they reached it, and his mother stood framed in the glow. She looked smaller than he remembered, her hair gone almost silver, but her eyes still sharp enough to cut. She crouched and opened her arms, and knee barreled into them without hesitation. His mother laughed, a sound like old bells, brittle and bright, and pressed kisses to Nye's cheeks until she squealed. Then she straightened, her gaze flicking to James, and something soft cracked in her face. She reached out, touched his cheek like testing if he was real, then stepped aside so they could come in. The house swallowed them in warmth and the faint smell of cinnamon. Presents waited on the low table, wrapped in shiny paper that caught the lamplight like water. Nye gasped, darting toward them, then looked back for permission. James's mother nodded, smiling thinly, and watched as the child tore through the paper like wildfire. Dolls, hair ribbons, picture books, an avalanche of color spilling across the dark wood. James stood by the wall, watching the scene like a man peering in through glass, his chest tight with something he couldn't name. His mother finally turned to him, her voice low. "She's beautiful," she said. It sounded like both a blessing and a warning. James swallowed and said nothing. Diep appeared from the kitchen then, hair damp from the steam, apron streaked with soil. She froze at the sight of them all together, knee on the rug. His mother perched above her, James half in shadow. For a heartbeat, the world felt like it was holding its breath. Then she smiled, small but steady, and the room exhaled. They gathered in the kitchen as the sky sank into indigo. The air was thick with the smell of boiling bamboo shoots, rich and green, curling around them like memory. James rolled up his sleeves, insisting on helping, though he moved like someone unused to soft tasks. Diep handed him vegetables to slice, and he attacked them like enemies, his knife flashing too fast, too hard. She laughed quietly, adjusted his grip, and for a moment the tension cracked, spilling something warm and almost joyful into the air. Nye sat on the counter kicking her heels, chattering about school, about how the teacher said her handwriting was like tiny worms. James's mother listened, eyes bright but distant, as if memorizing every word to guard against forgetting. Outside, the wind howled against the half-built walls, but inside the house glowed, soft, defiant, alive. It felt, briefly, like the beginnings of a family. Then the phone rang, a harsh, sudden sound that sliced through the warmth like a blade. His mother stiffened, stepping away to answer. Her voice dropped to a whisper, taut and fraying. James kept chopping, jaw tight, pretending not to listen, but the air sharpened around him like broken glass. Diep caught his eye, her brow furrowed. The call stretched long and thin, his mother's face bleaching with every word. She ended the call and stood still for a long moment, as if the floor had tilted. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat. It was his father. He knew about Nye. He was furious. He said this: James, the farm, the adoption, was madness. He said he was coming back to Vietnam. Soon. The words fell like stones into the room, sending silent shockwaves through the walls. James's hand stopped moving. The knife clattered against the board. He didn't speak. His mother tried to smile, brittle and trembling, and said his father just needed time, that he would come to understand. That family always did. Eventually, her eyes begged him to believe it. He didn't. The silence pressed in, heavy and damp, smelling faintly of fear. Diep moved first, breaking the spell. She said dinner was ready, her voice too bright, and began setting the table. James followed mechanically, his movements stiff, like a marionette with tangled strings. They carried the dishes out, one by one, into the candlelit dining room. The table glimmered with steam and silver and shadows. Nee skipped in, trailing laughter like sparks, oblivious to the dark undercurrent curling beneath the floor. They sat together, James, Diep, his mother, and the small bright thing between them who held all their futures in her small hands. They passed the food, smiled when they were supposed to, spoke in careful half-sentences that never touched the bleeding edges of the truth. But beneath it all, the room hummed with something sharp and waiting. The house listened, its new bones creaking softly in the wind, as if it too sensed the fracture forming in the dark. The dining room glowed with a gentle amber light, as though the house itself was trying to pretend it hadn't heard the poison that had just been spilled. Steam rose from the bamboo shoot soup like pale spirits, coiling above the bowls and vanishing into the ceiling. Nye sat between James and Diep, chattering about her day at school, her small voice bright and reckless, skipping across the surface of a silence that was growing darker by the second. James smiled when she looked at him, but the curve of his mouth never reached his eyes. His mother ladled soup into the bowls with deliberate calm, each motion slow, mechanical, as if she feared shattering if she moved too quickly. Her hands were steady, but her eyes flickered toward James, like moths skimming a flame. Diep set out the rice, the plates of pickled greens, the salted fish, her movements sharp and precise, hiding the tremor in her fingers. The smell of warm broth wrapped around them like a net, too soft, too fragile. Straining to hold them together, they began to eat, spoons clinking softly against ceramic. Nye slurped happily, swinging her legs, oblivious to the way the adults around her were holding themselves like glass about to crack. James forced the soup down, each swallow scraping his throat raw. His mind was a storm, his father's voice echoing, cold and absolute, promising to come, to tear this fragile new life apart. Every beat of his heart thudded with a single thought. Not her, not Nee. His mother broke first. She spoke lightly, too lightly, about how beautiful the farm would be once the gate was finished, how strong James's hands had always been, how she had known he could build something solid out of dust. Her voice trembled like a tight string. James said nothing. The silence stretched like a noose. Diep spoke next, gently, asking Nee to tell them about the stars she had won at school. The child launched into an eager story, arms flailing, and for a moment the room softened, like sun breaking through storm clouds. James watched her, the tiny pulse beating in her throat, the quick gleam of her teeth when she smiled. She was everything soft he had ever known, everything good. And the thought of his father's shadow falling across her made his stomach lurch. He gripped his chopsticks until the wood creaked. His mother noticed and flinched. She said his father didn't understand yet, but he would. He always came around. He had just been hurt before. James laughed then, low and bitter, a sound that didn't belong in the warm room. He said his father didn't come around. He crushed things. He said his father's love was like frost, beautiful from a distance, deadly up close. His mother's face went stiff, lips thinning like paper. She whispered that he shouldn't talk like that. That words had power. James said power was exactly the problem. The air between them thickened, sharp as broken glass. Diep cut in, her voice firm, slicing through the tension like a blade. She said tonight was for Nye, not for ghosts, that this house was not a battlefield. Her eyes pinned James like nails, daring him to fight her and break the spell of warmth they were clinging to. He looked at her, and for a heartbeat his fury faltered. He nodded once, jerky, and lowered his gaze to his bowl. The soup had gone cold. They finished the meal in a strained silence, broken only by Nye's humming as she made mountains from her rice grains. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the half-built gate. The house shivered in its frame, a creature sensing a predator on the horizon. James cleared the dishes with hands that shook, stacking bowls like bones. Diep wiped the table, her face set in careful calm, though her shoulders were taut as drawn wire. Nye ran off to the sitting room to play with her new dolls, her laughter echoing down the hallway like bright birds. When she was gone, the silence slammed down, heavy and suffocating. James's mother stood by the sink, her back rigid, staring out the window into the darkness. She said quietly that his father would arrive in 3 days. Her voice was flat, as if she had carved the words from stone. James froze. The air seemed to drain from the room. 3 days. The number hung above them like an axe. He asked what his father had said. Exactly. His mother hesitated, then whispered that he had called Nye a mistake, that he had called James a fool, that he had said he would set things right. The words slithered into the room, cold and venomous, coiling around James's spine. Diep's hand found his, cold and fierce. She said they would protect her, that this house was strong enough to withstand storms. James wanted to believe her. He wanted to sink into her conviction like a drowning man clutching driftwood. But in his mind, he saw his father's eyes, hard, pale, merciless, and he knew storms were nothing compared to the man who had made him. His mother turned from the window at last, her face carved from grief. She said she would talk to him, that she would make him see. Her voice trembled, but her gaze was steel. James stared at her, at the woman who had survived decades at his father's side, and wondered if she had ever truly beaten him at anything. He wasn't sure anyone had. The fire in the hearth hissed low, collapsing into embers. Nye's laughter drifted back down the hall, sweet and distant, like a ghost of joy. James stood slowly, his chair scraping the floor, and said he was going to the gate. He needed to see how strong it was. No one stopped him. He stepped out into the night, the cold hitting him like a blow. The half-built gate loomed before him, its beams black against the moonlight, fragile bones trying to stand. He touched the wood, felt it tremble faintly under his hand. Behind him, the house glowed warm and small, full of light and breath and fragile dreams. Ahead, the darkness sprawled, vast and patient, waiting for his father to come and decide what would live and what would burn. James closed his eyes, forehead pressed to the cold wood, and whispered a promise into the wind. Not her. Whatever it took, not her. The night did not answer. It only listened.